The deal begins. In the vast expanse of space, far from the bustling heart of galactic civilization, lay an uninhabited rocky planet. Its barren surface, dotted with craters and ridges, provided the perfect cover for clandestine activities. It was here that Sheila Donovan, a seasoned human operative, and Tunel, a jittery alien from the Jush species, had arranged to meet their contact. The tension was palpable as Tunel nervously checked his sensors for the umpteenth time. "We aren't equipped for crime like you humans," Tunel muttered, his eyes darting around the empty landscape. "And yet here we are." Sheila laughed, the sound carrying an edge of amusement. "Relax," we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere. There isn't anyone or anything in the whole system. But what if we were followed?" Tunel's anxiety was growing by the minute. Sheila rolled her eyes. "We weren't followed. I checked. It's an empty goddamn system. It's not like we could miss them." "They could be cloaked," Tunel insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "If a cloaked Federation warship were tailing us, they would have gotten us by now," Sheila replied, her tone remaining calm. "They could be waiting for the cellar." Tunel's breathing quickened. Oh, by the creators, this was a bad idea. "Too late to worry about that now," Sheila chuckled. "Besides, isn't a just cause like yours worth a little risk? If you can't handle this, how the hell can you expect to handle the merchandise once you get it?" Before Tunel could respond, the sensor lights flashed, indicating an incoming ship. Sheila pulled out a communicator. "Black Dragon, that you?" A gruff voice responded, "Yep." "How's it going, Sheila?" "Pretty good. The Jush is about to wet himself again, but other than that, we're golden." "Great. We are sending a dropship now." Sheila turned to Tunel with a smirk. "See, you worry too much." As she finished speaking, an angular black ship appeared on the horizon, its sleek form cutting through the void with silent efficiency. Tunel's eyes widened in alarm. "That's a Raven." Sheila laughed again. "Good call. That is indeed a Raven-class assault lander. We use a lot of stuff from the Great War. We built so many warships that we haven't really had to build new civilian ones. You'll see battleships being used as tankers if you get closer to Sol." "So you just disarmed your warships?" Tunel asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Disarmed? You're adorable, you know that," Sheila replied with a grin. The Raven landed with the silence for which they were known. The hatch opened, and the biggest human Tunel had ever seen stepped out. Sheila trotted up, and the two humans performed a strange body-squeezing gesture that looked affectionate. The big human then looked over at Tunel. "That the buyer?" "Yep. This is TT. This is Johnny. It is an honor to meet you, Mr. Johnny," Tunel said, trying to maintain his composure. "You got the money." Johnny's abruptness startled Tunel, but he reminded himself that he was dealing with humans, and the criminal element at that. He nodded and produced a small data crystal. Johnny scanned it and whistled. "It is an honor to meet you too." He then headed towards the open hatch of the lander, beckoning them to follow. "I have a wide selection of goods, and I think you will be quite pleased," he said with a smile. Johnny opened a crate, revealing rows of automatic rifles. He picked one up and tossed it towards Tunel, who barely caught it, almost letting it fall to the deck. "What you have there is the Terran Classic, the AK-47. These have been in use for over 1,000 years, and there is a reason. Your physiology is close enough to ours that you should be able to use them with no modification. 30-round magazine, reliable, completely chemically powered, and will tear right through a personal deflector. They won't show up on sensors, at least at first. We also have armor-piercing rounds specially designed for standard combat armor. Right through the screen, then right through the vest." "Holly, are these relics?" Sheila asked as she caressed one fondly. "You think I would be selling relics to a non-human? These are old stock from early Independence War production runs on Terra. That is why they have the wooden stocks. We were running low on polymers there for a couple of years." "Can I have one?" Sheila asked, excitement lighting up her face. Johnny tossed her an AK, and she squealed in delight. Johnny grinned over at a stunned Tunel and opened another crate. These are Model 1911 45 ACP semi-automatic pistols. The high-mass and low-velocity rounds will cut right through deflector belts. The recoil might be a little heavy for a Juche, but you should be able to handle them with practice. Johnny continued showing off crates of human weaponry, each one more intimidating than the last. All of these goodies are completely chemically powered as requested, and all of them are proven effective against Federation, Imperial, and collective forces. Tunel gulped anxiously as he looked at the list that his leader gave him. He started hiccuping and about to faint. Sheila and Johnny grinned impishly. "Oh yes," Johnny said, moving to the back and rolling out a trolley with 6 long black polymer cases with bright yellow markings. He opened one. Here they are. Type 7 tactical nuclear weapons. They are fission-fusion hybrid explosives. I'm sure you are familiar with these babies from the war. Tunel was speechless, his hiccups worsening. These are just the warheads, mind you, Johnny continued. You will have to find a way to get them where you want them to go boom. Sheila sighed nostalgically as she ran her fingers along one of the cases. She looked up at Tunel with misty eyes. Oh, you will like these. Tunel was about to pass out. The transaction went smoothly, and several more Ravens landed, loaded with arms. Sheila inventoried the goods and checked off the shipments. That was actually Tunel's responsibility, but he needed a little break and was sitting on a crate of AK-47s, breathing heavily into a respirator. Okay, T, you are all set. Everything is bought and paid for. Schematics, tutorials, and the like are on this, she said, handing him a data crystal. Hey Johnny, can I hitch a ride with you? Sure thing. Hop on, Johnny replied. Tunel was confused. You aren't continuing to travel with me. Sheila laughed. On a ship full of illegal arms, including nuclear weapons, that is heading through Federation space. Are you out of your mind? Later, T. Sheila waved as the Raven's hatch closed, leaving a desperately gasping and hiccuping Tunel holding his head in despair. I hate humans, he mumbled between hiccups. The fallout begins. Ambassador John Wintersmith sipped coffee as he watched his holo monitor. Scenes from the Juche Civil War were playing on just about every Federation news channel. Blown-apart troop transports, shredded habitation pods, crashed landing craft, and pixelated dead Federation peacekeepers had been playing damn near 24 hours a day for the past few days. He smiled. It was the standard Federation cluster. Now the Juche government force was screwing the pooch. He could understand, but the Federation should have learned by now. He turned to an uncensored Federation government feed to watch actual combat footage and nodded approvingly. The Juche were pretty damn good shots. He had no idea who supplied them, but they had clearly bought the good stuff. They were using frontline hardware, especially those armor-piercing rounds. Those had to be late-generation stuff, at least Mark 12s from the looks of the carnage. The feed suddenly shifted to a static-filled picture of a mushroom cloud rising in the distance. John's smile faded. Who the hell sold them nukes? One political incident coming right up. He pulled out an edible from the desk drawer and consumed it, savoring every morsel. Grandma made the best brownies. Another mushroom cloud popped up, then another. He picked up the analog telephone on his desk and called his secretary. Good morning, sir. Have you been watching the feeds? His case secretary lisped with undisguised amusement. Yes, I have. Get me in touch with Terran intelligence. I've already started the process. John smiled again. Good old Toby. Annoyingly efficient as always. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Hey John, this is Helen. Helen, hi. The Juche just used nukes. Is there something you need to tell me? They didn't get them from us, if that is what you are asking. Any ideas? Nothing confirmed. We do know that Sheila Donovan was recently seen in the company of an unknown Juche, though, Helen replied. John groaned. Can we just arrest her already? For what? Having lunch. We don't have anything on her. We never have anything on her. You guys are intelligence, right? Can't you just make the problem go away? Since the shooting stopped, we are avoiding extra-legal solutions, especially after that fiasco on Io. The best I can do is list her as wanted for questioning concerning matters of Republic security, Category 1. But she has had that dubious honor for a while. Ambassador, Counselor Kishala is here wishing to speak to you urgently, Toby said over the intercom. I bet he does. Helen, I got to do damage control over here. Helen cut off the communication. Toby, let the Honorable Counselor in and make some cream tea. Will do, boss. That Honorable Counselor prefers pesca. I'll brew that instead. I do not desire refreshment. I require answers. Qualta screamed loudly as he stormed in, his crests fully engorged and pulsing. John rose and bowed politely. Counselor, to what do I owe the honor of your presence? John said with amused courtesy. The sight of an enraged Poe was something that always tickled him. Pissing them off was sort of a hobby of his. The edible was starting to kick in, and he had to keep himself from giggling. You know exactly why I am here, Kishala hissed. Calm down, Counselor. Anger does not facilitate constructive communication. John laughed. Shala used that exact same line on him once, and he loved rubbing his face in it every single time he could. Kishala became silent, shaking with rage. Let's try using our grown-up inside voices now. Let's try this again. To what do I owe the honor of your presence? As you are no doubt already aware, Terran combat arms and fusion explosives have been used by Jush insurgents in their illegal insurrection. Yeah, the Jush drones and your peacekeepers are getting their asses handed to them by some miners. I've been watching the feeds. They are pretty good. You admire them. Now. Inside voices, please. John giggled despite his best efforts. A Muppet with inflatable peckers popping out of his head was just too much. To answer the question that is odds are the reason for gracing me with your most august personage is no. No, we did not supply the rebels, and no, we do not know who did. The next answer is yes. Yes, we are looking for them. And yes, we are taking this seriously. John gave Kishala a pleasant, lightly stoned smile. This was a fantastic batch of brownies. He made a mental note to call Grandma. Kishala quivered with rage. He hated Terrans with a burning passion. Every time he saw one, he immediately remembered slithering over the dead and clawing his way past the living as he surged towards an escape pod in a blind panic, with Terran Marines right behind him, calmly slaughtering their way through the station. That was horrible, but what truly tightly bound hatred to his heart was the short message burned into the hull of his pod as he made good his escape. Your life has been spared by the Terran Republic. He blinked hard, trying to swallow the hate and rage and remain professional. The war was over, and he had to try to move on. But each and every time he saw a Terran, it all came back. And John was perhaps the worst. Most species chose their most polite, most diplomatic, most deferential individuals to be ambassadors to the Federation. But the Terrans sent John. To use a human term, John was an asshole. Kishala in his studies of the humans' language had always struggled with human idioms, slang, and obscenity, but the word he understood. John was an asshole. He wasn't posted as ambassador in order to encourage peace and mutual understanding, but more as an enduring go fuck yourself, directed to the Federation. Go fuck yourself was a phrase Kishala was also familiar with. It was used by John quite often. What he hated most about John were the medals he wore, all of his decorations denoting his experience and prowess in battle, on his diplomatic uniform. Kishala had informed himself regarding the meaning of each and every one, and the bloody swath across the galaxy they represented. The one that was the absolute worst was the stylized silver human skull and crossed femurs on a notched black obsidian background. It was the mark given to a Marine raider, with each notch representing 10 kills. He had seen them before, killing their way across his homeworld in their expressionless powered exoskeletons. John had a lot of notches. Kshela checked the brainwave scanner he had implanted in one of his manipulators. As usual, the brain waves from John were utterly unusable. He did not know whether it was some primitive technology or archaic martial discipline, but John could change the baseline of his mental state seemingly at will. He could somehow make everything seem funny to himself regardless of the gravity of the situation. All he could detect was mild euphoria and hilarity. Do you honestly expect the Federation to believe that you do not know the origin of those fusion bombs? John looked over at Kshela and laughed. Do you have any idea how many nukes we produced? No. How many? It wasn't a rhetorical question. We have absolutely no idea how many we made. We were cranking those babies out as fast as we could. And we made them by the millions. John looked at a data screen. From what we can gather, the ones the Jewish freedom fighters are using are between a Type 5 to a Type 8, he continued. Those were belt-fed into mass accelerators and sprayed by the dozen. You remember, right? You are from where, Zarin 7, isn't it? John smiled, revealing his wide, fang-laden mouth. Kshela lunged forward with a primal hiss. Pincers spread as he nearly leaped over John's desk. John rose from his desk, still wearing that toothy grin. Why, Counselor, you surprise me. Where is that stately decorum for which the Federation is known? You're acting almost Turan. Not that I object, of course, he snickered. Green flames started bubbling from Kshela's primary mouth, dripping onto John's desk. Kshela, shuddering with rage, drew himself up to his full height, and without bothering to wipe the rage fleeing from his face, said, "The Federation is disinclined to believe that the distribution of fusion weaponry to those acting against the Federation is accidental, and is, in fact, deliberate. We view this as an act of war." "Okay. Sounds good to me," John said with a giggle. Kshela blinked in shock. "Do you not realize the gravity of my statement?" "Sure do." John picked up his toppled cup, went to the coffee maker, and poured another drink. "Let me explain something to you." He took a long, slow sip. "A lot of Terrans think that the war ended way too soon, including myself. A lot of us think that we should have kept going, myself included. A lot of us, including myself, view sneak attacks, especially when we were already weakened due to a conflict with the collective, to be a dick move and would love, truly and deeply love, watching the entire Federation burn. So forgive me if I don't throw myself down in front of you begging for the almighty Federation to spare us lowly, backward, primitive humans." John advanced towards a bubbling and spluttering Kshela. "If you want to declare war, go right ahead. I'm begging you to do it." He continued his advance, backing Kshela into a corner. "So the way I see it, you have two choices. You can declare war over some surplus from a war that you started coming back to bite you in the ass, or you can take your threats and fuck off." Kshela hissed and spat a huge wad of rage phlegm at John, splattering his uniform, shoved him out of the way, and stormed off. "Are you certain you don't want to stay for tea?" John called after him with a giggle. An enraged scream echoed down the hall. John grinned, took off his now slimy jacket, and flopped into his chair. "Diplomacy is hard," he said with a smile as he reached for another edible. Investigating the source. Back in his office, John Wintersmith sat down and began to plan his next move. The Federation was clearly upset, and the situation needed to be diffused before it escalated further. He called Helen again. "Helen, we need to find Sheila Donovan. Any leads on her whereabouts? We're tracking her movements, but she's been elusive. We know she's been in contact with several Jewish insurgents, but her exact location is still unknown. Keep me posted. We need to bring her in and find out what she knows. This is getting out of hand." As he hung up the phone, John's mind raced. The situation was more complicated than it appeared. The Jewish insurgents were using Turan weapons, and now there were nukes involved. He needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Sheila Donovan was already on her next mission. She had just completed the arms deal with Tunel and was now heading towards her next contact. The Raven-class assault lander she was on hummed with energy as it sped through space. Johnny, the pilot, glanced over at her. "What's the plan now, Sheila?" "We need to lay low for a while. The Federation is going to be all over this. We can't afford to be caught." Johnny nodded. "Understood. We'll head to one of our safe houses. It's well hidden and off the grid." As they flew through the void, Sheila couldn't help but think about the implications of their actions. They were arming insurgents with powerful weapons, and now nukes were in play. The stakes were higher than ever. Back on Terra, John Wintersmith was briefing his team. "We need to find out who supplied those nukes and put a stop to this. The Federation is on the brink of declaring war, and we can't afford to let that happen." One of his aides, a young intelligence officer named Lisa, spoke up. "We've been analyzing the data from the battle. The Jewish insurgents are using late-generation Terran weapons, but the nukes are older models. They date back to the early Independence War." John nodded. "That matches what we suspected. We need to trace their origins. Get me everything we have on old weapons stockpiles and see if any have gone missing." Lisa nodded and left the room to begin her investigation. John leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He needed to get ahead of this situation before it spiraled out of control. A few hours later, Lisa returned with a report. "We've identified several old stockpiles that match the description of the nukes used by the Jewish insurgents. Most of them were decommissioned and stored in secure facilities, but there have been reports of theft and smuggling." John sighed. "We need to follow up on these leads. We can't let these weapons fall into the wrong hands." As the investigation continued, John received a message from Terran intelligence. Sheila Donovan had been spotted on a remote planet, meeting with known insurgents. He immediately ordered a team to track her down and bring her in for questioning. Meanwhile, Sheila and Johnny arrived at their safe house, a hidden base on a desolate moon. The base was well-equipped and secure, providing a perfect hideout for their operations. Sheila sat down at a console and began to review the data from their recent deal. She needed to ensure that everything was in order and that they hadn't left any loose ends. As she worked, Johnny approached her. "What's the next move, Sheila?" "We need to stay off the radar for a while. The Federation is going to be looking for us, and we can't afford to be caught." Johnny nodded. "Understood. I'll make sure the base is secure." As they settled into their hideout, Sheila couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The Jewish insurgents were now armed with powerful Terran weapons, and the Federation was on high alert. The situation was escalating, and she needed to stay one step ahead to survive. The interrogation. Back on Terra, John Wintersmith's team successfully tracked down Sheila Donovan's location. A strike team was dispatched to apprehend her and bring her in for questioning. As they approached the hidden base on the desolate moon, they prepared for a potentially dangerous encounter. Sheila and Johnny were alerted to the approaching strike team by the base's sensors. Sheila quickly grabbed her weapons and prepared for a fight. "Johnny, we've got company. Get ready." Johnny nodded and armed himself as well. They positioned themselves defensively, ready to repel the intruders. The strike team breached the base's perimeter, moving swiftly and silently. They encountered heavy resistance from Sheila and Johnny, but their superior numbers and equipment eventually overwhelmed the pair. Sheila and Johnny were captured and brought back to Terra for interrogation. In a secure interrogation room, John Wintersmith sat across from Sheila. He studied her carefully, noting her defiant expression. "Sheila, you've been a thorn in our side for far too long. It's time to come clean. Who supplied the nukes to the Jewish insurgents?" Sheila smirked. "I have no idea what you're talking about, John. Don't play games with me, Sheila. We know you've been supplying weapons to the insurgents. We need to know where those nukes came from." Sheila's expression hardened. "Even if I knew, why would I tell you? What's in it for me?" John leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Your life, for starters. You're facing serious charges, Sheila. Treason, smuggling, illegal arms trading. Cooperate with us, and maybe we can work something out." Sheila considered his words carefully. She knew the stakes were high, but she also knew that revealing her contacts could have serious consequences. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Fine. I'll tell you what I know, but you have to guarantee my safety." John nodded. "You have my word. Now start talking." Sheila took a deep breath and began to recount her dealings with the Jewish insurgents. She revealed how she had obtained the weapons, including the nukes, from old stockpiles that had been forgotten and left unguarded. She also provided the names of several key contacts who had facilitated the smuggling operations. As she spoke, John listened intently, making notes and asking questions to clarify the details. It was clear that Sheila's information was valuable, but it also painted a grim picture of the extent of the black market arms trade. When the interrogation was over, John stood up and extended his hand to Sheila. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll do our best to ensure your safety." Sheila shook his hand, but her eyes remained wary. "I hope you keep your word, John. This information could get me killed." "We'll protect you. You have my word," John replied. With Sheila's information in hand, John's team began to dismantle the smuggling network and track down the remaining weapons. It was a complex and dangerous task, but they were determined to prevent further escalation of the conflict. Meanwhile, the Federation was growing increasingly frustrated with the situation. Kishala and his superiors were demanding answers and threatening further action if the Terrans did not take control of the situation. John knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The delicate balance of power in the galaxy was at risk, and any misstep could lead to all-out war. He had to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy and intelligence to prevent disaster. As the investigation continued, John received a message from Helen. "We've located another major arms cache. It's heavily guarded, but we have a plan to infiltrate and secure it." John nodded. "Good work. Let's move quickly. We need to shut this down before it spirals out of control." The strike team was dispatched to the location, and after a tense and dangerous operation, they successfully secured the cache. The weapons were confiscated, and several key figures in the smuggling ring were apprehended. With each success, John felt a growing sense of accomplishment, but he knew the battle was far from over. The galaxy was a complex and dangerous place, and the shadows of conflict and intrigue lurked around every corner. The Federation's response. As the Terran efforts to dismantle the smuggling network intensified, the Federation grew increasingly restless. Kishala was under immense pressure from his superiors to take decisive action. The use of Terran weapons by Jewish insurgents had escalated the conflict to a boiling point, and the Federation's patience was wearing thin. In a high-stakes meeting of the Federation Council, representatives from various member species gathered to discuss their next move. The atmosphere was tense, and the stakes were high. Kishala stood at the center, addressing the council with a mix of anger and urgency. "We cannot allow this blatant violation of our sovereignty to go unpunished," Kishala declared, his crests pulsing with intensity. "The Terrans have supplied our enemies with weapons of mass destruction. This is an act of war." Murmurs of agreement and concern rippled through the council. The representatives knew that the situation was dire, and the possibility of war loomed large. One of the representatives, a venerable elder from the Kayseri species, raised a hand to speak. "We must consider all options before resorting to war," the elder said, his voice calm and measured. "Diplomacy has not yet been exhausted. We should demand a formal investigation and reparations from the Terrans." Kishala's eyes narrowed. "Diplomacy has failed us time and again. The Terrans are untrustworthy and dangerous. We must show them that we will not be intimidated." The debate continued, with voices on both sides of the argument growing increasingly heated. The council was divided, and the tension was palpable. As the representatives argued, a new figure entered the chamber, High Chancellor Tulara, the leader of the Federation. Tulara was a formidable presence, her tall, graceful form commanding attention. She raised a hand for silence, and the council members fell quiet. "We stand at a crossroads," Tilara began, her voice resonating with authority. "War with the Terrans is a grave decision, one that we must not take lightly. However, we cannot ignore their actions. We will demand a full investigation and reparations. If they refuse, then we will take appropriate measures." The council members nodded in agreement, and the decision was made. A formal demand was sent to the Terran Republic, requesting an immediate investigation and reparations for the use of Terran weapons by the Jewish insurgents. Back on Terra, John Wintersmith received the Federation's demand with a sense of foreboding. He knew that the situation was delicate, and any misstep could lead to war. He immediately convened a meeting with his team to discuss their response. "We have to take this seriously," John said, his tone grave. "The Federation is on edge, and we need to show them that we are committed to resolving this peacefully." Helen nodded. "We've made progress in dismantling the smuggling network, but we need to present our findings to the Federation. They need to see that we are taking action." John agreed. "Prepare a report with all the evidence we've gathered. We'll present it to the Federation Council and request a joint investigation." The team worked tirelessly to compile the report, detailing their efforts to track down the source of the weapons and dismantle the smuggling network. They included evidence from Sheila Donovan's interrogation and the raids on the arms caches. With the report in hand, John prepared to address the Federation Council. It was a critical moment, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The joint investigation. John Wintersmith arrived at the Federation Council chamber with a mix of determination and anxiety. The Grand Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all watching intently as he took his place at the center. High Chancellor Tilara presided over the proceedings, her presence commanding respect.